actually like wrote the book in HTML and CSS, like vanilla HTML and CSS files as like a website?
I wrote it in Markdown, converted it to HTML, and then the actual converting it to like a PDF. There's like a whole subset of CSS that is print only styles. So I literally did the whole thing in CSS counters for table of contents and header footer designs. It's not fun,
Yeah.
but I did it. And then I ran it through some PDF, HTML to PDF generator.
Wes, welcome to the Backend Banter podcast. I'm so happy to have you on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Pretty stoked to be here.
Yeah, so I first heard you on a podcast. It was the Indie Hackers podcast, I think. This was like almost 2 years ago now. And it honestly was
Yeah.
a big inspiration to me in terms of like, I was just starting to break ground on boot.dev at the time, which is like an e-learning platform for backend development, if you're not familiar with it. And I was super new and I was listening to that podcast and just blown away by all of the really cool stuff you were doing in education technology. So the first question I want to just throw at you is what started you in edtech? Like, why did you start making courses online?
So I grew up like when blogs started to pop off, like Smashing Mag and Web Designer Wall, and there was all these blogs, and I loved reading them. And there's always that dream of making money online, right? And then you see people like Chris Coyier and whatnot. I thought like, I want to do something like that, right? So like I was starting to write my own blog and whatnot, and I never really like kept up with it as frequently as I should have. But those blog posts where somebody asked me to like lead a workshop in Toronto, something called Ladies Learning Code. It's like a not-for-profit, teach women to code. And I did a one-day workshop, and I just like kind of just spit the words out of my mouth and how I understood how things work. And I got a lot of really good feedback from that. And people say like, hey, like I really like how you explain things and you make it so simple. And like at the time I was just like, oh man, like here I am trying to read like books on becoming an educator and properly saying things, but in the reality, the way that it makes sense in my head is also the way that it makes sense in a lot of other people's heads. Um, so I decided, I'm gonna write a book. And then I did a bunch of videos with that, and the videos did super well. And the rest is kind of history from there. I just kind of just kept building more things that would help people, YouTube videos and
Yeah.
courses and all that good stuff.
So it started with a blog and then a book accompanied with videos. And then eventually you graduated into like fully fledged online courses.
Yeah, it was. I, I had been approached by a couple publishers, which I since learned, like publishers email like literally everybody. But they asked me to write a book, and I was like, "All right, yeah, let's talk about it." And then they told me like how much I would make, and it was just like it was peanuts. And I people don't write books to make a lot of money, but I was like, if I'm gonna like put some effort into this, it's got to be worth my time. So I was like, you know
Yeah.
what? I'm just gonna write my own book as like a digital one, and then I had a bunch of videos that sort of accompanied it. But then I realized like it was at the time where YouTube was starting to become more popular and video, and I was like, you know what, like video is kind of where it's at, for me at least. So I decided just to double down and go all in on video.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. Do you mind sharing? Like what is peanuts?
Yeah, so the way they explained it to me is that a book sells for, let's say a book sells for $25. um 10% of that would go back to you, I think it was something like that, or 20%, and then 50%, 20% goes back to the publisher, and 50% of that goes to you. Basically, it was like a couple bucks a book.
Wow.
So
You
like
sell a
you'd
book
be
for
if,
$25, you make 250.
yeah, and like that's wild to think about. And
Yeah.
I realize there's a lot of that goes into it. A publisher has a lot of on the line, and the places that actually sell the book are have a lot on the line, and there's bigger margins in ebooks, I'm pretty sure, but it's not a whole lot at the end of the day. A lot of people did it for consulting revenue or to get a job or to be an expert in the industry.
Yeah. Rather than just the the profits of the book itself. That's that's still wild. Did
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
yeah, did so is there anything you're getting for that 90% other than just like the physical print of the book? Like, are you getting like an editor? Is there some team that's helping promote it? Like what other value are you getting by giving up 90% of the cost of your book?
Yeah, yeah, there's that's the other thing is I realized that I could probably do the stuff that the book company was doing for me. So they give you promotion. Like a good example is O'Reilly. O'Reilly, biggest tech booking. They have massive audience. People just go to O'Reilly, say, I want to learn about this topic. And if it's an O'Reilly book, they'll read it because they know it's going to be good. Right. And there's a whole editing process. There's somebody to keep you honest. Like everybody starts writing a book and then nobody ever finishes. So there's literally somebody at there that will sort of help you pace yourself through this gigantic task of writing a book. Um, there's a whole bunch of like there's a whole marketing arm. Like I get all the time people send me their book in the mail. And there's generally some sort of marketing arm that's finding people in the industry to send the book to for review, right? So
Oh yeah.
it's not that there's nothing coming from that 90%, but I realized like I could build my own audience, like I figured I was doing pretty well on Twitter at the time. So I figured I don't need the like promotion. I can figure that stuff out myself. Then the reviewing can be done by just like peers. So
Yeah.
and then I designed the whole thing in HTML CSS. So it wasn't anything I needed them for.
You actually like wrote the book in HTML and CSS, like vanilla HTML and CSS files as like a website?
I wrote it in Markdown, so converted it to HTML, and then the actual converting it to like a PDF. There's like a whole subset of CSS that is print only styles. So I literally did the whole thing in CSS counters for table of contents and header footer designs and margins and inches. It's not fun,
Yeah.
but I did it, and then I ran it through some PDF HTML to PDF generator.
You have a really cool course on Markdown. I'm a huge Markdown fan. Basically, all of my writing now, like all of it, like anything, is Markdown. And so that's
Yeah,
definitely the way I would have done it.
yeah,
Was t- take the Markdown, generate some HTML, maybe apply some uh probably Tailwind CSS classes at this point because I've been such a fan of that recently,
yeah,
but and then print to PDF.
yeah, yeah. The one thing that I had trouble with was getting it in. I had it in EPUB, but I had to get it in like Mobi or something like that for the Kindle, and I never ended
Yeah.
up figuring out how to get it converted. I went down a deep rabbit hole, and this was 10 years ago. I'm sure the tools are much better these days, and there's Gitbook and a whole bunch of nice tools for writing that type of stuff. But at the time, it was relatively new to write a digital book.
Right. Okay, so I'm familiar with your Markdown course, JavaScript 30. But I
Yeah.
noticed you have a lot of courses. And
hmm
first of all, like where do you center most of the content that you put out around JavaScript, or have you dabbled in other stuff?
Yeah, I would say it's all web development content. So I'm a full stack JavaScript developer. So everything I do is either CSS, JavaScript on the server, client side frameworks, things like that, that sort of center around building applications and websites.
Yeah. No, it's really cool. And I love that you have that kind of focus. I've seen a lot of websites out there that seem to have very little focus. And I'm always very skeptical about picking up courses from those kinds of sites just because I feel a little bit less sure. And it's not even like that objectively that's a bad thing. I just feel a little less sure that the person knows what they're talking about. So seeing you
Yeah,
doing JavaScript over and over and over is kind of nice.
yeah. There's a couple like course creators out there that are like, here's a Java thing, and here's Objective C, and here's intro to Tailwind, and like it's like there's no chance that you know this deeply enough that like I want to learn from a professional and not a professional teacher, you know? And
Yeah.
I have a pretty wide breadth of stuff that I do, but it's all stuff that I'm actually building applications and websites with. And I don't just learn something to teach it and then give you the basics, because we've all been there. And then as soon as you like get a little bit more complicated into something, you'll go like, "Oh, well, how do I handle X, Y, and Z?" And it's like, "Oh, you intentionally didn't touch upon that because it's significantly more complicated
Right.
than you think you cranked it out in
Swept
a
all
course."
the complexity under the rug.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
always frustrating, you know?
Yeah, on Boot Dev, we teach backend development in Python and Go, and I very consistently get, you know, asked to add Java or add Rust. And it's
Yeah,
like I could maybe see a potential future for the platform where those things exist, but like I'm not the instructor. Like I
yeah,
can't be. My whole career was in Python and Go. Like those are the things that I'm most qualified to teach about. And if we do anything else, it's gonna be somebody else.
yeah, yeah,
So, one thing that also really struck me as I was going through, so it's wesbos.com for anyone
yeah.
listening, you want to go check out all the courses. Um, you have a lot of courses and they're all on their own websites. So, what does that tech stack look like? Like with Boot Dev, we've thrown everything onto a single platform. There's kind of centralized infrastructure. Um, are you like copy pasting websites? How does that work?
Yeah, I initially I put them all on their own domain name because I was my whole mantra in life is make it a thing. You know, like my a lot of my free courses could very well just be YouTube videos, and they are. I put them on, but it somehow feels a lot more special and a lot more valuable when you make it into a product or make it into its own thing. So that's why everybody asks that, like, why is everything on their own domain name? You're ruining your SEO, you know. So that's why it's all on their own domain name. And the tech stack behind it is it's a single node instance that runs absolutely everything. And very early on in the middleware that accepts all incoming requests, it, it classifies which product you're viewing based on the domain name that's coming in. So if I fix a feature or change something, then all of that is just one code base. The entire viewing experience is a single code base on a single domain name. um, but like the marketing websites are all on their own domain names. And every single time I make a marketing website, not every single time, but I will copy paste some stuff, and a lot of it is shared. The checkout code is shared between all of them. But the marketing HTML and CSS, which is such a small part of it, is done custom for every course.
This is fascinating to me because I've worked on a lot of websites where
Yeah,
I've got a single domain and I have many services in the back and in the background, right? And I've talked about this on Boot Dev, like kind of a microservices architecture versus a monolithic architecture, and when you might
yeah.
use one over the other. Whereas you're doing this thing I've never done before, which is like you've got a monolith. And you kind of, I mean, distributing it's the wrong word, but like you're accessing it through different domain paths.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's kind of like a SaaS app if you think about it. It's like a multi-tenant app where every customer
yeah,
has it's like Shopify's like that, you know? It's one Shopify server running somewhere. Obviously that's not true, but
you're like white
every
labeling your own product, right?
exactly. Yeah, and people have asked me a lot of times, "Hey, can I use that?" You know?
Yeah. So I mean, is this like fully homegrown? Like when you when you're building this and you're like googling around trying to see what other people have done, could you even find anything?
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot. So like Nathan Barry, who is a ConvertKit guy, he at the time he had built a bunch of products. And what a lot of people do and did is they use I don't know, like everyone was just giving a zip download at the time, right? And that's what I did at the time. And I couldn't find anything that would let you do like video and audiobooks, or like I could not audiobook, sorry, video and a book download. I just couldn't find anything that was that specific other than like a WordPress plugin that was like easy digital downloads. That's what a lot of people were using. So I was like, you know what? Like I'll just build it myself, which is the classic developer problem.
Yeah.
Um and that was probably 9 years ago, and it's just evolved in many ways. I wrote the thing in CoffeeScript. That's how old it was, but
Yeah.
it's not in CoffeeScript anymore. It's went through CoffeeScript to JavaScript to ES6 to TypeScript now. Uh, but it's been nice. It's fun to work on that type of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so for our listeners that have never heard of CoffeeScript, can you give us like the
Yeah.
50,000-foot overview?
So before we had any of the nice features of JavaScript that we have right now, which is classes and the ability to do string interpolation, like very
Yeah.
basic stuff, arrow
Template literals,
functions,
yeah.
scoping of the this keyword in JavaScript. All that stuff was such a pain. And at the time, Ruby on Rails was extremely popular. So basically, they took some of the Ruby on Rails stuff. They took like this indentation syntax, and put it all into this CoffeeScript that compiled into JavaScript, and it was pretty popular for a while. Backbone JS was all written in it, and it sort of fell out of favor as we got ES6 and a lot of the new features to JavaScript, because
Sort of
those
native.
pains got away. And then we also realized, like, maybe this indentation thing isn't so good. It's kind of hard to figure out where you're at.
It's like, it sounds to me like TypeScript without the types. It's like Ruby script.
Yeah, you could say that. It's just, yeah, like it was mostly syntax, I guess that's
Yeah.
what the TypeScript is. So
So this is actually an interesting thread to pull on. It's been announced that types or type annotations are like
yeah.
probably coming to JavaScript. Do you foresee a possible future where what happened to CoffeeScript happens to TypeScript? Like I can effectively ignore this extra tool, ignore a compile step, and get all the features that I want without actually importing TypeScript. Will we see that in the next few years?
Probably not the next few years. It's going to be it's hotly contested. It's called types as comments, which is a bit odd because it's not comments, but the reason they say comments is because the types are going to be stripped out before the browser parses it, right? The browser
Right.
will not know about the types, but the syntax will be expanded so that tooling knows about all of your types. So I think this is just my wild guess. I think TypeScript is not going to pull a CoffeeScript. TypeScript's going to pull a jQuery, which means that the built-in version of JavaScript is going to get so good that we no longer need it. Because, like, I know people, jQuery sucks and whatnot, but like we have all of jQuery in the browser now.
Right.
And the reason why jQuery was sunsetted was not because it sucked. It was sunsetted because we don't need it anymore. We have better things in the browser that can handle it. So I bet we will get there eventually, especially because it's optional. And there's some stuff in TypeScript that maybe shouldn't be in TypeScript, and it's kind of a nice thing where, okay, well, we had 12 years with TypeScript. Now we can look at the language itself and say, how do we do this right?
Yeah. So I want to give you a couple of my thoughts on this whole this whole TypeScript JavaScript ecosystem, at least surrounding what we're talking about now, and then I want to hear what you think.
Hmm.
Um, so for me, TypeScript's been huge. When I started adding types to my code base, like immediately bugs were found. Like, yes, it got pretty verbose, but I was able to find a lot of stuff. The biggest headache for me was just the fact that now I've got like 17, what feels like 17 different linters in my code base. I've got like eslint, prettier, TypeScript. I've got whatever VS Code's trying to do out of the box, and getting them all to work together has been a nightmare. And I was told, oh, maybe you should use JSDoc instead. My problem with JSDoc was that, it's actually exactly what you said, which is like types in comments, but like they were actually literally in comments, which just
Yeah,
feels
yeah.
super weird to me. Like it could work, but like it just feels wrong that like I'm writing comments. This is actually a gripe that I have in the Go programming language too, is there's actually been language features that are added inside of like a specific styling of comments, and
Hmm.
it feels so wrong to me. I feel like my comments should be exactly what they advertise themselves to be, which is like comments that do absolutely nothing.
Hmm.
um but I'm curious what you think about this, like what you think about the current state of things and where you actually want to see things go with like JavaScript and Node and TypeScript.
Yeah, yeah. The tooling landscape is pretty fragmented at the moment. Um, like everybody, not everybody, most people use eslint. Most people are using Prettier. M- Lots of people are using TypeScript, and if you're not using TypeScript, VS Code is running TypeScript. That's what it's. All of the stuff in VS Code is just running TypeScript on your JavaScript for you, and that's how it gets all your autocomplete and all that good stuff. So, um, there's been several like efforts to combine that all into one. So there was a thing called Rome, which raised a bunch of money. It never went anywhere. It's been forked into something called Biome. Dino, which is another server side JavaScript runtime, has its own everything: formatter, runner, linter, test runner, all that good stuff. Bun is another one that has just made a big splash lately. But then we have several others. I think we're eventually going to land on this like one tooling that will do it all. I think that the TypeScript compiler needs to be rewritten as well, because right now what we're doing is you run TSC, which is the TypeScript compiler. You run that to actually do type checking, and then generally you run another tool that just strips the types and gets you faster reloading and all that type of stuff, right? And there's a couple people working on writing the like not just the stripping but the actual type checking in Rust or Go or something like that, uh, which is it's a incredibly hard. There's a reason why nobody has just spun up a quick little type checker, because it's edge cases galore. I certainly would never want to do that myself. So
Yeah,
I think I'm just kind of sit and look. I've got all my stuff all dialed in. Like I have a
it's
whole
working for
setup
you.
called the no set. It sucks, but I have like I put Prettier into ESLint and just packed it into one single thing. And it's really nice because I can just add that to a project and get a lot of my tooling up and running fairly
When you say
quickly.
packed it into a single thing, like do you mean you like made one config to rule them all, so to speak, or is there something
Yeah.
deeper going on?
Well, so I have this thing called No Sweat ESLint. Um, and so it's an ESLint config with a Prettier config built into it. And it's been patched so that you don't have to install. ESLint has this weird thing where it doesn't install peer dependencies for you, and
Oh,
it's
okay.
it's very it's a whole world of hurt. And they're fixing it in the next version of ESLint, but um, I've patched it. Microsoft has this patch where you can pack all of the plugins into a single thing. So now you just have to npm install WesBos ESLint config, and then do one line
Ooh,
in your package JSON, and you're up and running. It doesn't cover your TS config though, so you still have
right.
to do that and all the other 40 other configs that you need. But it's like quick enough that if you're someone like me, I'm sure you do this as well, is you're building probably at least one thing a week, and you're starting fresh one thing a week. And a lot of people work on the same app their entire career. But for guys like us, we just need to be able to quickly get up and running with all of this tooling. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
getting easier.
it's a totally different world. I was at a single company for like 4 years at one point. It was actually technically 2 years, and I went somewhere else and then came back. But you know, consolidated 4 years. And when you're at a company like that, yeah, you like set up your environment once, and you kind of forget about it until like 3 major versions down the line. You realize there's some feature you want, you
Yeah.
change it and you update it.
I
Or you
think
just have
the
like a team setup that you're getting onboarded to. Yeah, go ahead.
I think the remote editors are also going to solve a lot of this pain. So GitHub code spaces, Google IDX, Gitpod, Code Sandbox. There's like a million of them out there right now, and essentially they are all just VS Code and a VM that runs your application. And eventually, it's going to be like, oh hey, new hire, click this link in your setup.
Yeah.
This is the project, and here's another project we have that's totally different set of tooling. Click this link in your setup. So it's not going to be like, oh, make sure you have the right version of Node on your computer, Docker this or what, all that stuff. Eventually, we're going to get to a lot of companies are already doing it. They're all just coding in the browser, which is wild.
Okay, I also want to pull on this thread. You keep saying interesting things that I need to unwind. I tried GitHub Code Spaces. So first of all, I want to say, just like from a theoretical perspective, like you give me that sales pitch of like, here's a link. It opens
Yeah.
an IDE in the browser, which is effectively what VS Code is anyways, right? It's an Electron app that's built with HTML and CSS and JavaScript. A whole Chromium thing going on in the background. But you give me a link and I can like open the project with all of the proper configurations. Like,
Yeah.
you had me at hello, basically. Like, that sounds amazing to me. I tried it out. In my experience, it worked okay. It's a little slow, right? You're
It's
interacting
laggy,
with
yeah.
like a server, which is like, I can kind of be okay with that. I'm not like a, Neo Vim power user, but I foresee a lot of the same problems that like a Google Stadia had, right? Like cloud gaming. And for two reasons. One is like the whole lagginess problem. But even deeper than that, developers, in my experience, are like the most opinionated people in the world about their tooling. Like, I feel like I'm the least opinionated person. Like, just give me a config that works, please. Like, I don't have too many special requirements. I use a normal ass keyboard. Like, it's fine. But that is not my impression of like any developers I've worked with. I feel like everyone has their own special setup and they want to be able to like, everyone works on the same project, but with their own tooling in some sense. Do you see a future where we can get to that like cloud hosted
Yeah.
development environment?
I honestly think we are, because like you can dial your VS Code in however you want, right? Like there's no limitations from the local version versus the remote version, other than like there's latency, right? And I think a lot of that slowness, not necessarily latency, but the slowness goes away when you get like a higher tier. It's expensive too. Like I was looking at the prices, it could be $7 a day per employee, right? Like
Right.
that's pretty spendy for that type of thing. So, but honestly, like when Prettier came out, Prettier said, "All right, here's a formatter, 3 options. You want to specify how many items go on a line per, right? You can't. You never will. And initially, I was just like, okay, I can choose what kind of quote I want and tabs or spaces, and that's it. And all of this other stuff. But honestly, like life's a bit better when you don't have to fuss about that. Like I think I have opinions, but I can get used to that type of stuff if the trade-off means that it's a lot easier and it's all built in for me. So I think that we'll get there. And like you can still, it's just a box. You can still install ZSH on these boxes and customize your command prompt and all that good stuff. So we'll see. We'll see where that headed and if people start to like it. But like from what I've heard in larger companies, Slack, Shopify, a lot of their devs are already doing it, like full-time deving on that type of stuff.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that if bigger, I would imagine bigger companies would have a harder time pulling it off. But if they're pulling it off, then I imagine it might trickle down to the rest of us over time.
Yeah, because it's like less of a fuss to like, especially from like an IT perspective. Oh, I dropped my laptop in a pool. Just go grab another one, open it up, log in, you're good to go.
Yeah. I remember back when like not all development was necessarily like done on GitHub or like pushed to GitHub every day. And that's a totally different world than now. Like now, you like, yes, we are still predominantly working on our own machines with our own, editors and command line tooling. But like multiple times a day, hopefully, code is getting pushed up to the cloud. So you're not losing months of progress when the on-premise hard drive gets dropped in a lake or rained on, more likely.
Yeah, exactly. I remember when I started, a lot of my coding would be like Coda was the editor, and they had this like FTP thing where you FTP into a box and you just live edit. And every time you hit save, it would upload it, and like no version control, nothing. Like you could really screw yourself, but that's how a lot of people did it. Like that was a bad feature to put in there because it was so nice just to edit, refresh, you know?
Yeah, well, I remember. I think this was like 2010. It's like probably even later than this needed to be the way it was done, but it was still done this way. I had a professor in college who was telling me, "Hey, this is how we do web development. Like, go to Bluehost, right? This is a specific hosting provider. Who knows if they're still around?
I
Get
I,
like a two
I
dollar.
still pay them I still have a bunch of
You still
websites
have a
on
bunch of
Bluehost.
Bluehost. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
they're
Yeah.
jacking the prices though, so I think I'm gonna leave.
All right. Do your own research before using Bluehost, I guess. But you pay like $2 a month or something, and you get like I don't even know how to describe. You'd get kind of like a virtual machine, but it's like nothing like what you'd get on AWS, right? And at least the way I was taught in school was like, okay, all you do is FTP onto this machine and move your HTML and CSS files directly onto the machine. Like no Git, no source control, which like at least for the last 7 or 8 years that I've been working in the industry, like I haven't used FTP really at all, other than like for like really weird esoteric use cases. My flow is now always going through Git and then like at the very least SSHing into a box and doing a Git pull, but more likely having some sort of CI/CD flow that's actually pushing stuff out to a production server. Um, were you around in like the FTP web dev days, and did you do that sort of thing, or did you always have a different system?
Oh yeah, yeah. I like I've been a developer for a long. Hold on, I have a live counter on my website, wesbos.com/about. I've been a developer for 23 years. And like a lot of that when I was a kid, just noodling around on the internet. But like I got my like professional start in WordPress land. So uh,
Yeah.
the FTP game and being able to change it up. And what was the one like when I learned what rsync was, like a game changer. Only upload the files that changed. You know, like that
Yeah.
was such a good uh like a good way to do it. It's still not awful, but I don't know. I haven't used FTP in ages.
Yeah. It's like I said, I think I've done like some weird stuff where I like had a backup of a database that was huge, and so like the easiest way to move it was to like FTP it.
Hmm.
I can't even remember the details at this point. Um okay, I didn't realize that. I mean, 23 years, that's a long time. What have you been doing most recently? Like I know that JavaScript 30 has been around for a bit, but like what's been like the last year for you?
So the last year has been kind of two things. So first, I've been working on a TypeScript course. It's almost done. It's been taking quite a while, but I'm pretty stoked to get it out. So that'll be out fairly soon. And then the other one was so we have a podcast that's about web development. It's called Syntax. And we put out 3 episodes a week. And we actually recently were acquired, or we joined a larger company called Sentry, which is really cool because they have resources to expand the podcast into bigger things
Ooh.
that we want to do. So my time has been mostly split between figuring out what does a bigger, badder, wickeder podcast look like, and building this TypeScript course.
So we're talking about syntax.fm, right?
Yeah,
I'm a huge fan. I love that podcast.
thank you.
Is the podcast for you like a basically a completely separate thing from the courses and the course platform that you have? I know you've got a co-host, right? Scott Talinsky.
Yeah.
Um, is it just like its own project?
Um, I don't think so. I think like my project is being the web development guy, you know,
Yeah.
and through whatever medium I feel like I can make cool stuff, that's how I will do it. So the podcast is a fantastic medium to get a lot of stuff across, right? And then video courses is another great way to learn stuff, and they're sort of separate. We initially started it just as like a way to promote our own courses, you know, and it's
Right.
evolved into this awesome learning resource.
I can't believe you do 3 episodes a week. So this podcast, Backend Banter, is very much a podcast for boot.dev in the sense that boot.dev is a place to learn backend development. This is a
Yeah.
podcast about backend development, right? They go hand in hand, made by the same person. I do 1 episode a week at the moment, and I feel like it takes a good chunk of my time every week. How are you putting out 3 episodes a week? Are they shorter? Are they longer? Like, just
Yeah,
do you have any efficiencies? Yeah.
we have, so on Monday we have a hasty, which is 15-20 minutes, and then Wednesday we have a tasty, which is 60 minutes, and then Friday we have an interview, which is another 60 minutes. So
It's a lot
like
of content.
we have an editor, we have an editor that will write the show notes and edit the whole thing together and do all of that stuff for us. So that's probably the hardest part about all of the stuff, is just editing it and getting it out. Um, Another tip we have is we sold sponsors for an entire year in like October of the previous year. So like that money was spoken for. So we had to keep making the podcast. So that was good.
Yeah.
And then we have each other to keep doing it. So like we split a lot of the work of, like, sometimes Scott will come up with an episode and outline the whole thing, and I'll often have ideas and I'll outline the entire thing, and then we'll do some together. So yeah, we're just, feel like we're just really good at it, and it's a good chunk of our week. Like
Yeah.
it is a big part of what we do, so we spend a good amount of time on it.
Like, if you had to estimate, so like, for example, I think I spend about 1 full working day
Yeah,
on the podcast at the moment. Between, I mean, I do have an editor. I do, but I have to do like research in advance, and I still have to like come up with captions and clip it into little shorts and post it everywhere. How much time do you spend on a weekly basis?
um so when before Century acquired the podcast, it was between 8 to 15 hours a week.
Okay.
Now it's Scott's full time on it. I'm about 20 hours a week on it. And we also have Ben, who's full time. He's our like manager, and Caitlin, who does marketing, social media. So, yeah, right now it's about 20 hours a week, and recording, editing, recording, coming up with show ideas, scheduling guests, all of that. That's probably a good 10, 12, maybe 15 hours a week. And then the rest of it is um, marketing, social media. We're doing a merch store right now, so like checking out quality of skateboard decks, and like just like thinking about what color hats should be. So there's a lot of stuff like that. Having meetings with suppliers and meeting with vendors and all that good stuff as well.
Wow. Yeah. The cost of quality. Holy cow. That's like
Yeah.
60 man hours between the two of you on a weekly basis. Are you, was it always that way? Like, when you started the podcast, were you dedicating that much time?
No, so we initially started it with one episode a week. And we we sold all the sponsorship spots like a full year in advance. Like, people were loving
Right.
it. And then we had all these people being like, "Hey, like, I want to sponsor a podcast," and we were like, "Well, like, we can't add more,
Right.
but we can. We have all these ideas of things to do, so we can add a new podcast." So we added the Hasty Treat, which is the Monday, because like we also had a lot of topics that were like, you can't get an hour out of this topic, but you can get 10 minutes, you can get 15 minutes out
Right.
of it. So why don't we just make a shorter version? Those are the topics that only take that long to go over, rather than putting 3 things in an episode. Just make them their own episode. So we did that, and then we're like, well, should we start having people on? Because initially we're like, no interviews, it's just us. We know what we're doing. But then people were like, you should have people on the podcast. Every now and then we'd have somebody on, but uh, we're like, let's just go gung ho and have one person on a week and be able to.
You're just doing all 3 formats. Why choose
Yeah,
one? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Go on it, and that's kind of the fun thing about it, is like I kind of do my career that way as well. It's like, I don't know, just see what works. Just let her
Yeah.
rip and see how everything pans out and what people like and what people don't. Like, lots of experimentation, I think, is key if you're going to get into this creating content business.
Yeah. So you've been in this content creation space, kind of the, um, I guess, instructional design space, right?
Yeah.
Onboarding new full stack web developers for some time. I've been doing very specifically just back end in Python and Go for the last 2 years, roughly. I'm curious what kind of trends you've seen, let's say over the last decade. So, like someone learning to code, right, to get their first job as a programmer 10 years ago versus 2023. What are some of the biggest differences in terms of like maybe the landscape or the most effective strategies?
Oh yeah. Well, you know that meme that goes from the like dumb guy and then it bell curves up to the genius and then
The
back
midwit meme.
down.
Yeah.
What's it called?
The midwit meme, right?
The midwit meme. Okay.
There's like the
It's
midwit
basic.
in the middle and the Jedi on the one side.
Yeah. So it's basically that with PHP on both sides. So uh, that's not a joke. Is that 10 years ago, everybody was like, you know what? Maybe we should be building everything in WordPress and kick PHP.
Yeah.
And maybe we should be building all these JavaScript frameworks, client-side renders, major APIs, REST APIs for everything. Now a GraphQL API. And only recently, in the last couple of years, especially like MySpace, a front-end JavaScript world, it has very quickly swung towards um, RPC, towards fully typed, towards just throw a SQL statement in a loader right above your
Yeah.
template. And maybe that's a lot easier when your back end and your front end are a lot more connected, especially when you're writing it in the same language. It's nice when you can
Right.
share a lot of that stuff back and forth and it doesn't necessarily matter other than like your database queries and whatnot. It doesn't really matter where it's running. So that's kind of the landscape I've seen it go over the many years. And I think we're in a really good spot right now where a lot of the frameworks are adopting this like full stack. For years we're like, where's the Rails of JavaScript? And we don't have the Rails of JavaScript, but we have something that is, I think, even better or closer, where it's not a whole bunch of work to you can still
Yeah.
bring your own stuff, but it's not a ton of work.
So I want to like regurgitate what you just said back to you, to make sure I understood what you're saying, and then maybe add an additional caveat, or at least my own opinion for some of our listeners that might not be in the like startup full stack space. But if what I'm hearing is correct, you're saying like rewind 10 years, people are building PHP sites. And
Yeah.
the like the critical thing about PHP sites is that you're kind of doing everything all in one place. You're like rendering your HTML, you're interacting with your database, and you're doing that all within like your PHP files. You've got this like
Yeah.
monolithic app that is serving both the back end and the front end and connecting to the database. It's all in one place. And then like somewhere along the way, we decided to get really clever and like decouple everything, add microservices to the back end, right? Split everything. So you've got like now this React single page application maybe on the front end, and you've got a back end written in either Node or Go or something like that. And so now
Yeah.
we have like this decoupling problem where there's like a lot of complexity. So it's like really hard to work back end to front end, right? Like I change a model in my database and that type change isn't reflected on my front end. So I have to like go manually update all the different values in
Mhm.
like 2 or 3 different apps. And now what you're saying is we're kind of getting back to like PHP days, not necessarily in PHP, but with like full stack TypeScript.
Yeah, exactly. Like you were seeing much tighter integration between our data model, the controllers, server side rendering, client side rendering, updating, all of that. So like we are we're writing it like it was a PHP app, but we can still reap a lot of the benefits of serverless hosting and scaling and like rehydrating on the client and
Yeah.
everything that we liked about JavaScript, all in sort of one package.
Right. Okay. So I agree with a lot of that, but I don't know if pushback's the right word. I want to point something out. I feel like if you go a little deeper, and maybe this is me just being the midwit in the meme. Uh,
Yeah.
the part of the meme is like you never know which of the three you really are. Um,
Yeah.
maybe you find out 5 years down the line. But my perspective is that I actually think we've learned a lot in the last decade about when different architectures tend to make sense. And I would agree that, say, 5 years ago, this idea of like decoupling front end and back end for like a traditional website was like overused, right?
Yeah.
Like we're going to use React on the front end for like pretty simple website, maybe not even a web app. And all that did really was hurt developer productivity. I've got two code bases to work in now instead of one. But I have seen other apps that I've worked on in my career where it actually would have probably been a nightmare to be in a monolithic, like single node server, just because we're doing like massive amounts of compute, for example. And we could take that compute and like move it to another server and scale that up and down independently. Usually, this only happens, in my experience, in like bigger, usually B2B type companies where you like have like some big data processing arm. Like you're not just grabbing data from a database and like displaying it to the client in like a typical
Yeah.
CRUD app. Do you have you seen any nuances in that over the span of the last 10 years? Or I mean, it may just be the fact that you've like worked on smaller full stack applications.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
No, we see. I think two things is like we write it like a monolith, right? You write your logic to fetch and process data and whatnot like it was a monolith, but it it can be scaled up to different types of compute that need to scale up and down. Like a good example is the new syntax website. We have transcription. So when there's a new episode, there's something that goes off and it downloads the episodes, transcribes the entire episode, pings a couple AI services, pieces those together. And like that stuff is not like a CRUD. That doesn't. It happens like on cron jobs or based on a webhook ping or something like that. But like the way that I authored it, it doesn't necessarily matter because it's just I just put the function in a folder and I can be able to address that however I want. But the other thing I see a lot more in like corporate world is like where GraphQL has been headed is that there's a lot of like you take a look at who do we have on the podcast in the in the UK. There's like a big it's called Peacock or something.
Peacock.
What is it? Yeah, Peacock TV. Basically, there's like it's like BBC or something like
Okay.
that. They own like a bunch of different channels, something in the BBC. And he was on. He's like, you know what? We have 100 different teams spread across our thing, and we had the developer from Disney on as well. He's like, you know what? We have 16 different systems in Disney, and one of them is a CRM, one of them is our database, and one of them is data from marketing, and like there's all these different um, pieces of the business, and you're able to join those together. What we're starting to see is people are saying, oh yeah, GraphQL is actually a really good intermediary layer, meaning that all of these businesses, you might have some like old dusty box from that's running AS400 and it spits out a CSV once a week, but we're
Yeah.
seeing people writing like that can work like that, but it in order to surface it, they're running that through the GraphQL API to say like this is our intermediary layer. All of the teams that work on their products have to surface their pieces and their updates and their mutations and their queries through the GraphQL API, and it's a great way to sort of be able to talk to each other. So that's what I'm seeing is like, no, not everyone's going to write. You have 100 teams. Not everyone's going to be writing everything in one node application. They're all going to pick their own tech stacks and their own compute and their own whatever. And in order for it to all work together, then you're responsible for maintaining like a GraphQL schema, and however the data needs to get there is how it gets there.
So you're talking about like how you expose the applications you're building, like outside of the company?
Uh, outside the company, but also internally, right? Like, wouldn't it be nice to say, all right, we need to talk to fulfillment, and we are the internal HR platform. And when somebody is a new employer, sorry, when someone starts working for us, we want to send them like a T-shirt, right? And like, wouldn't it be nice to not have to say, all right, let's schedule a meeting between fulfillment and HR, and these are two different dev teams, and we need to be able to figure out how to talk to each other. And all right, well, maybe if you once a day you send us an email with CSV and we can download and process it, and all of that. Like, wouldn't it be nice if you just had documentation where it's a single GraphQL API and these two, like, internal tooling is a major part of a lot of these companies. They can talk to each other and be able to
Yeah.
send data back and forth.
I think we forget sometimes, or at least I do, how many developers around the world are just working on internal tooling.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's
Like,
I'm actually thinking about doing like an entire podcast just on internal tooling because it's huge.
yeah, I mean, a lot of my career has been doing essentially internal tooling. I think sometimes we, especially in like the YouTube and the Twitter world, can come to think, as a new developer, that like all we do is database, REST API, front end. Like that's what all web developers are doing. That's probably a minority of web
Yeah.
developers, especially when you consider the fact that the companies still just doing that are actually very small companies, not hiring all that many people. Once you get to bigger companies, it starts to make a lot of sense to have your developers build gobs of internal tooling, right? That just talks to all the different services that you've built to make sure that things are automated.
Yeah, exactly. You can have better customer service, you can have higher sales. Like there's so many things that could be built. Like I have an entire uh admin platform and I have an assistant who I pay to take care of all of the support for my courses that's like non-technical, right? And the amount of
Yeah.
little tools that I've built that makes it easier on her, faster for her, better for the customer, you know, is it might be
Yeah.
more code in there than the actual like player to do the videos. I don't know, but it's a lot.
Yeah, people are always asking me for like ideas for projects, because on the back end side of the stack, it's not as simple as like just build a visual project. Sometimes it's like when you're trying to build a project in Python or Go, it's usually like some kind of command line application. Maybe there's a server component to it, but you kind of want to be able to use it conveniently without opening like an HTTP client. And I've built so many tools for Boot Dev. Boot Dev is a 3-person company at the moment. And we probably have 20 or 25 scripts that we've written just to automate all the crap we do daily. Like, for example, I have a writer who prefers to write in Google Docs, right? She's
Yeah.
a contractor and she writes for me and it's great, but she writes in Google Docs. And I do not like manually copying and pasting her stuff out of Google Docs into my Hugo Markdown file, right? So that I can push it up to my static website. So I've got a tool that's using Pandoc, right? And a
Yeah.
bunch of custom logic to put that into my format and upload it to the site. So many project ideas.
Yeah. I love building that kind of stuff. Like the other day, I was doing my expenses, putting all the expenses in and I import the expenses from my credit card and they all come up as uncategorized. I'm like, there's no chance I'm going to sit here and figure out what every single one is. So I wrote a whole bunch of scripts that will automatically figure out what the taxes are on each of them and and then I sent it to Claude AI, which is like an open AI competitor. And I said, given these categories, I pulled them from the FreshBooks API. And given these expenses, I pulled those from the API as well. Categorize them for me, and then you can update them in there. And just like that type of stuff,
Yeah.
it's less error prone and it's really fun to build because it's not as soul crushing as clicking the buttons yourself.
Yeah, there's this famous XKCD comic, you probably know the one I'm thinking of, where it's like the joke is, a developer would rather spend like 24 hours automating something than the 2 hours it takes to manually
Yeah.
do the task. And I mean, there's definitely that extreme of it, but like even if you were to just take, say I have a 4-hour manual task, I would much rather spend 4 hours automating the task
Yeah.
than doing the task, if for no other reason that it's more fun to
Exactly.
write
Yeah.
the automation than to do the thing.
And to my it's also content for me, like okay, if I can build it and get an episode out of it, that's a double whammy.
Yeah. It's content for people who aren't content creators. It's also just practice,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
learning, it's potentially portfolio projects. It's like there's all these reasons to start automating the manual crap you do day to day, in my opinion. So maybe we'll kind of wrap up the episode with this idea of kind of I'm asked all the time, like, what is the landscape like over the next 5 years for people learning to code?
Hmm.
Um, And I just had Rob Walling on the podcast. I guess it would, by the time this episode comes out, it'll have been a few episodes ago. But he was basically saying, you know, coding skills, like, yes, you can go get a full-time job as a backend developer. That's great. It's fantastic. Or a full stack or front-end developer, whatever. But just having coding skills seems to be getting more and more useful in my mind. So like we had this big scare. It was like, okay, AI is going to replace all our jobs as developers. And I was a little nervous like when things first started to happen, just because there was so much uncertainty. But from what I've seen over the last 6 months, I just feel like the divide between people who are technically savvy and who aren't is actually just widening, in the sense that, like, because I know how to code, I can use the OpenAI API, right, to start automating my tasks, rather than like having to act like a caveman and type it manually into ChatGPT. Like, I just feel like the things I can do with my coding skills are actually getting more valuable. And it's harder for me to work with someone who can't commit to Git, for example. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Um, Let me think about that. What are my thoughts? Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. Being able to work with people. It's true though that like I find myself walking around, like if you're specifically talking about a lot of the AI stuff, I find myself being like, man, this could be 100 times better in like an afternoon of coding. Like that, the FreshBooks example is a really good one. Like, why is FreshBooks not have an AI categorization for my things? I have 10
Right.
years of categorization of expenses in there, and you're telling me that you don't know that ESO is like a gas expense? You know, like come on, like you could fix that with AI so much more. Um, but yeah, I think like technical coding skills certainly are a very good skill to have. I think I also wonder a lot about like is the new generation of people that only use their phones, like, are they going to be as good as, I don't know how old you are, but like I always say, us who like grew up with computers and love dialing all the settings and whatnot. I don't
Yeah.
know if that's just old man me talking, but it seems like
No, I read a study on this recently. I wish I could cite it. I can't. No idea what it was. But I read a study that basically the thesis was, we're millennials the most tech savvy generation, just because we grew up with the technology, but with crappy technology, like technology that we had to configure, that we had to install, we had to kind of like go a level deeper in order to use, rather than
yeah,
having, like, beautiful UIs that work out of the box. I don't know if it's true, but there's it certainly makes sense to me that it could be the case.
yeah. I think there's like a certain level of like dial that a lot of coders have where they go one step further. Like I often look at like no shade to the no code platforms, but like we had some guy on the podcast come talk about no code, and he was running his entire platform for $600 a month, stringing together Zapier and if this then that and like 1,000 different things, which is amazing. And honestly, I think a lot of like that's what a lot of the chat GPT stuff is going to be. But being able to take it even one step further and put those things together yourself is a superpower, I think.
Yeah, even if you start with the no code stuff, eventually being able to like have some custom control, because I mean, there's expense, there's also speed problems. Like, you're beholden to whatever, APIs are available to you, and
Yeah.
sometimes that might mean like doing request after request after request instead of like a bulk upload feature that you need. Um, so yeah, I mean, like, we use a ton of no code at Boot Dev just for it's funny, like, I talked to my boss, who's been around in industry much longer than I have, about using
Yeah.
Stripe. And he was like, I would never use Stripe. Like, I just roll my own. And like, to
Oh,
me, it's like Stripe is table stakes. Like, that, I don't even consider that no code in a lot of senses. It's like, why wouldn't you use something to process credit cards for you? But um the needle like moves, right, in terms of what we consider no code and what we consider code. So I don't know. I tend to use out of the box tooling as much as I can, but I do find myself uh, rolling stuff in house fairly frequently, especially when the use cases start getting
Yeah,
weird.
even just that glue code, that works everything. Like mine, I'll go back to that example. I just had the FreshBooks example. I was using FreshBooks, which is a service, their own API, and the OpenAI API or the Claude API
Yeah,
to do it. And like most of that code was written by somebody else, but the 200 lines that I wrote was a lot of the glue code. And there's no chance. Well, maybe I could have done that with Zapier, but like, how much is that going to cost a month to have to
right.
get that thing working?
Yep. In my experience, a big portion of back-end development in the modern world is gluing together 17 different
Yeah.
APIs that your product team has purchased over the last 6 months, making sure they all work together, that the reports all go nicely into, the single place, or all the data that you need out of the platform gets sucked into like an internal data lake. Lots of that kind of stuff going on. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been an awesome episode. What are all the places that you want to plug to my listeners? Like, where can people find you online?
I'm at WesBos, WesBos, literally everywhere. Most commonly on Twitter or X.
Zitter.
Uh, for tech stuff, I post hot tips there. And then I'm TikTok, Instagram. Yeah, I post a lot of like personal life stuff, fixing whatever to my Instagram. So if you're interested in that, you check that out. And then wesbos.com/courses has a list of all the courses that I offer if you want to learn a thing or two about web dev and JavaScript.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Wes. We'll talk to you
You're
later,
welcome.
man.
Thanks a lot.